Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my toasty warm backyard in Los Angeles, California. Today has been a bit of an interesting day. I was awoke by an earthquake at 4:30 this morning, and it is currently 102 degrees in my backyard, so this may be a little brief. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about the largest of all antelope. Today we are talking about eland. They are divided into two different species, the common eland and the giant eland. Now, despite what their names suggest, they're actually pretty similar in size. There are some common eland that are bigger than the giant eland, but also vice versa. So they're pretty similar in size, but they do live in different areas of Africa. Common eland, as their name suggests, are more common. There are a lot more of them. And they live throughout Eastern Africa and then down into Southern Africa as well. They kind of live in savannas or grasslands, woodlands, semi-deserts, and highlands. So like the foothills of some of the mountain ranges that are there. Giant eland are limited to very small areas, kind of in northern and western Africa, where they live in kind of a grassland woodland mixed habitat and sometimes have retreated a little bit further into forest, although not rainforest, kind of that drier forest. Both species are considered to be both grazers and browsers. Grazers eat grass, browsers eat leaves off of bushes and trees, and eland eat all of it. So during the rainy season and when grass is very green and very plentiful, they'll spend a lot of time eating grass. During the drier season, they resort to eating more leaves off of bushes and trees, and they can eat kind of a wide variety of vegetation, which allows them to occupy a wide variety of different habitats. During their day, they are kind of a crepuscular animal, which we've talked about on Critter Chat before. So they typically are more active in the morning and in the afternoon. If it is a hot day, like today in Los Angeles, they would be very much inclined to seek some shade and take a rest during the heat of the day. So just how big are the largest of all antelopes? Well, the males are bigger than the females by quite a bit. But the males are 6 feet tall at their shoulder. So that means their head's gonna be even higher. I'm 6'1", so that means if I was standing next to an eland, his shoulder would be right here. That's a huge animal. I remember the first time I kind of learned about an eland is when I was in college, and I was taking a zoology course. And on the wall in our lecture hall for zoology classes, there were several taxidermied heads of animals that the university had for many, many years. One of them, the one that was kind of right in the middle of the classroom, was a giant eland bull head, and it was massive. I had never seen an animal, aside from like elephants and rhinos that are insanely huge, or giraffes that are very, very tall. I had never seen an animal that was kind of an antelope or kind of in that family that was this big. And it really helped drive my desire to learn more about them. So they can also be about 8 to 11 feet in length for the males, and they can weigh up to about 2,000 pounds. That is a ton. Literally, a ton is 2,000 pounds. So they are very, very large animals. Weight-wise, that puts them on the same level as like an American bison bull, weight-wise. So they are very huge animals. The males tend to be a little more gray in color, and they have kind of a darker spot on their forehead and sometimes on their legs as well. They also have a big loose flap of skin underneath their neck called a dewlap. Some researchers believe that that helps them to actually cool down, as there's a lot of blood vessels that flow through that and can easily dissipate heat through that kind of flappy part of skin underneath their neck. Now the females, although they're not as big as the males, they are also very large. A female eland can be between 4.5 to 5 feet tall at the shoulder, so about here. And they can be 6 to 9 feet in length, and they can weigh up to about 1,000 pounds. So they can still be very large animals as well. They tend to be more tan, mostly with white stripes kind of running vertically along their side. Sometimes the male stripes kind of fade out and become a little more of that gray color. So with the common species, they tend to be much more social than the giant species. The common ones are often found in very large herds, typically from at least 10 individuals up to hundreds of individuals, with one herd being observed at over 500 individuals in the Serengeti, which is in Tanzania and Kenya. The common species, like I said, are more tan with white stripes. They have long spiraled horns. They just have little twist in them. And they kind of tend to have horns that go straight back, kind of going off at like a 45-degree angle off their head, which I'll explain a little bit why and how their horns grow that way in just a moment. The giant species, they tend to be a little more shy. So they live in smaller groups, typically like 10 to 15 individuals. They're a little more reddish in color, but they also have some, the males are gray when they get older and bigger. They continually add more weight kind of throughout their lifetime for the males. Giant eland tend to have thicker and longer horns than the common eland. But in both species, the females tend to have thinner horns and longer horns than the males. And on the giant eland, their horns tend to be a little more V-shaped, so they branch out a little bit more off of their head. But both species have huge horns, and they have just a slight twist to them, kind of like a cinnamon twist kind of thing. So it's not like they're super curly like some of the others. It's just a slight twist in their horns. And the horns are very well positioned to help protect them from predators. Despite their huge size, there are a lot of things that will try to eat an eland. So if it was something like a lion or perhaps a leopard, if they were in a forested area, that animal's going to try to go for their neck. And those horns are perfectly positioned so that if they raise their head back, those horns will kind of sweep over the back of their neck and be able to poke or jab anything that's trying to get them from that angle. They are also sometimes social with other animals, particularly zebras and another type of antelope that we've talked a little bit in Critter Chat called oryx. Depending on what else is in their habitat, they would kind of sometimes associate with some other animals as well. But zebra and oryx are the most likely of species that they'll hang out with. When they do that, they all kind of get along really well and help warn each other if any predators are approaching. So their predators, I don't know if I went over this yet, but it could include hyenas, lions, leopards, cheetahs, and African painted dogs, particularly for the young eland. The babies are born good size, probably weighing between like 80 and 100 pounds at birth. So that's already a good size meal for something like a cheetah. Lions will definitely go after adults. Hyenas could if the adults were kind of injured or separated from the herd. That is part of why eland are so social. It's because safety's in numbers. When they're such large animals, they can kind of help protect each other. And they do that better than most other antelope species. Typically when a predator approaches a herd of antelope, all the animals kind of scatter and run, and it's kind of everyone for themselves. But with eland, especially the females, will stick close together and kind of put their babies in the middle of the herd, and they'll help kind of protect and fight off the predators. Despite the large size, or probably because of their large size, they are not very fast runners compared to other antelope species. They're still way faster than people, being capable of running about 25 miles per hour over short distances and sustaining 15 miles an hour over long distances. But that still makes them the slowest of all antelope species. So they kind of don't run as much from predators as they do try to stand their ground, protect their young, and kind of try to fight off any predators, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. They've also been documented to be great jumpers, particularly in the younger animals. Not really the babies, but not fully an adult. It takes them to be about 3 years for a female to be mature, about 4 years for a male. So kind of in that range of maybe 3 to 5 years, they've been able to document them jumping 8 or 10 feet in the air from a standstill. So super great jumpers, and they've been known to jump over the top of one another. So that is kind of one of their defenses as well. Especially for the babies, they can kind of jump over maybe a parent or whatever, and that puts an animal with bigger horns in the predator's way. Their gestation period, or their pregnancy, can be about 250 days. That's about 8.5 months. And then when the babies are born, they form nursery groups. So they kind of have babies in similar time frames, and all the moms kind of stick together and put all the babies together. And they each take care of their own baby as far as feeding it, but they all kind of socialize, play together, and protect each other's babies from any potential predators. One thing that I think is super interesting about eland is that the males, when they're walking, make a very unique clicking sound. And it took researchers a long time to figure out what this sound was, and they're still trying to figure out why it happens. But it is actually a tendon in their leg that kind of clicks and snaps as they walk. They think that it's used to communicate to other eland in the area, that as only the older bulls make the sound, that there's older bulls possibly with a group, a family group in the area. They're not necessarily territorial, but a bull will try to defend his harem or his family from other bulls and kind of try to drive them away. With the common eland, they are listed as least concern, but their population has declined quite a bit in recent years. It decreased by half of the space that they were living in during the 1970s, particularly because many of the countries they live in were going through really rough civil problems and wars. Specifically Uganda, Rwanda, Angola, and Mozambique all went through huge civil wars during the 70s and 80s. And in those countries, population of a lot of animals suffered. But eland were kind of high on that list because, from what I have been told, they are very delicious and they're highly sought after by people for meat. And if you're trying to feed an army and you have guns, you could easily shoot some animals to try to feed them. And that caused the common eland population to be much more lowered several generations ago. They've bounced back in some of that area, and in some areas they are now being introduced and raised on ranch land that was typically for cows and other domesticated animals. Because eland are so delicious, they are raising them on ranch land and sometimes doing so to help feed people in urban areas, particularly in the cities in South Africa that have a large population. The giant eland is not doing so well. So there are two specific populations of giant eland, the western and the eastern. The western giant eland is listed as critically endangered, with an estimated population of between 120 to 150 individuals left. Most of them live in the country of Senegal, which is all the way over in the top corner of Africa in Western Africa. And there they live in a national park. There is some hope for them in that they're highly protected in that national park, and their numbers have gone up in recent years, although they have lost territory in surrounding neighboring countries. The eastern population of giant eland is listed as vulnerable, with an estimated population of between 8 and 9,000. They live a little bit in the country of Cameroon, which has a big human population, the country of Chad, the country of South Sudan, and the Central African Republic, all of which countries have kind of very impoverished people, and that of course never fares well for many animals. They are threatened by high demand for their meat and also as a trophy hunter, but that may be a possibility of saving the species in a national park setting where they're very closely monitored. They may auction off rights for hunting of the older bulls, and they pick out specific animals they could hunt and charge a huge amount of money to do so to help protect the rest of the herd. So it is a potential possibility to save this species, particularly in Senegal. They also are threatened with habitat loss across the range of both the common and the giant eland. As human populations continue to expand, that is a large problem for many animals in Africa. We have a special shout out today to the Prague Zoo in the Czech Republic. They are specifically funding an organization that is working with the government in Senegal to help bolster the wild population of eland, and they have created a captive breeding program in the national park where they are closely monitoring that population. And they started in the early 2000s with 6 animals, and that population is now over 100 in their breeding group. So that is very good news for them, and big shout out to the Prague Zoo for helping make that possible. As always, I like to talk a little bit about my experiences with the animals I feature here on Critter Chat. At the Phoenix Zoo, where I worked for 7 years in education and special events, we had some common eland females that lived in our savannah exhibit with our giraffes. They got along really well with everybody else out there on our savannah, and they were a really cool animal to see there. They were pretty social with the other species, sometimes interacting with the giraffe, sometimes with the ostrich, sometimes with the smaller gazelles, but they were always pretty generally happy and didn't cause any problems, which was great for that exhibit. They were kind of often overlooked because they were with giraffes, and giraffes are so awe-inspiring, and also ostrich, which are kind of crazy. But they were a very dynamic part of that exhibit. During my time there, I didn't work specifically with the animals, but I did sometimes help the keepers do some tasks, including one day helping bring in the eland to feed them. So that was kind of a cool experience that I got to enjoy as an educator at the Phoenix Zoo. The photo I posted earlier today on Facebook and Instagram is a photo that I took on my safari to Kenya in 2010. That is a herd of common eland. We were lucky to see eland several times on my safari. That was the photo that turned out the best, and I really like it because it shows off how huge that bull or male eland is in the center of the group. You can see he's a little darker gray, and he's about twice the size of the females, and the population there is doing well, as you can see a number of babies in that herd as well. But that's what I have to share with you about eland today. I'm gonna go back inside my house and cool down a bit, but I'll be posting more about eland later today on the Facebook profile, so check that out. And as always, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to all of my content across the platforms of Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com, where you can find photos of different animals as well as all of the critter chats. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun, take care. See you tomorrow.